Don't ever send a voice message when you're about to fall apart. My best friend once told me. But that night, sitting in my old Corolla with the engine ticking under the cold November air, I broke that rule, my hands shaking as I hit record, my voice barely holding together. I think I'm in trouble. I don't know who else to call. I wasn't thinking about contacts or consequences, just the weight in my chest and the feeling that something in my life was quietly collapsing. I hit send before I could second guess it, then stared at the screen as the message delivered. And that's when I saw the name, Adrian Cross. Not Emily, not anyone safe. Just two words that felt sharp and unfamiliar. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like missing a step in the dark. I scrambled to delete it, but it was already marked as listened. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again, like someone deciding exactly how much of me they wanted to keep. My phone buzzed once, a single message. You sent that to the wrong person. I swallowed hard, fingers hovering over the keyboard, every instinct telling me to apologize, to explain, to make myself small enough to be ignored. I'm so sorry. That wasn't meant for you. Please just delete it. I sent, watching the screen like it might bite back. Seconds stretched. The street around me felt too quiet, the glow from the dashboard painting everything in a dull blue. Then another message came through, slower this time. Deliberate. That depends. My breath caught. Depends on what? I typed, but didn't send, because something about the way he answered made me hesitate, like I had stepped into a conversation I didn't understand the rules of. I searched the name, just out of curiosity, just to calm myself down, but the results didn't calm anything. Articles with no photos, companies tied to shell names, mentions in business journals that felt too vague, too careful, like everyone knew more than they were saying. My heart started to race for a different reason now, not just embarrassment, but something colder, sharper, like instinct kicking in too late. My phone buzzed again, cutting through the silence. Where are you right now? Not a question. Not really. More like a statement waiting for confirmation. I locked the screen immediately. Tossed the phone onto the passenger seat like distance might make it less real. I should have driven home, should have turned the key and left, but I didn't. I just sat there, listening to my own breathing, until headlights washed over my windshield, slow, controlled, too intentional to be coincidence. A black SUV pulled up across the street, engine idling like it had nowhere else to be. My chest tightened. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was nothing. But then my phone lit up one more time, and I didn't need to unlock it to know it was him. Because somehow, deep down, I already understood. This wasn't a mistake I could take back. It was something I had just stepped into, and whatever waited on the other side of that message was already stepping toward me. I did not open the door. I did not move. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel while that black SUV idled across the street like it had been waiting for me long before I even pressed record on that message. My phone buzzed again, and this time I forced myself to look. Do not make me come to you. The words were calm, almost polite, but something about them pressed against my chest like a weight I could not shake. I swallowed and finally typed back. I am just in my car. I am leaving now. I am sorry about the message. It will not happen again. My fingers hovered before I hit send, as if I was asking permission from someone I had never met. The reply came faster this time. Stay where you are. And I froze. Actually froze, like my body understood something my mind was still trying to deny. I glanced up again, and the SUV door opened, slow, deliberate. And for a second, I thought about starting the engine, about reversing, about pretending none of this was real, but my hands would not move. They just rested there, cold against the wheel, as he stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a dark coat that fit too well to be accidental. Everything about him looked controlled, from the way he closed the door to the way he crossed the street without looking left or right, like the world adjusted for him instead of the other way around. My breath turned shallow as he approached, each step quiet but heavy with presence. And when he stopped beside my car, he did not knock right away. He just stood there, waiting, as if time itself belonged to him. I realized then that ignoring him was not an option, not because he forced it, but because something in me already understood that he would not leave things unfinished. I unlocked the door before I could talk myself out of it, the soft click sounding louder than it should have in the silence. He opened it without hesitation and leaned slightly down to look at me. His eyes were not angry, not even curious. They were focused, like he was assessing something that mattered. Claire Bennett, he said, my name landing between us like a fact, not a question. My throat tightened. I had not told him that. I was sure I had not. Yes, I managed, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He studied me for a moment longer. Then his gaze shifted briefly to the phone resting on the passenger seat. You talk when you think no one is listening, he said quietly, and heat rushed to my face, embarrassment mixing with something sharper. It was a mistake, I said quickly, gripping the edge of the seat. I already apologized. He nodded once, like he heard me, but did not agree or disagree. Mistakes have consequences, he replied, not harsh, just certain, like gravity. I shook my head, panic starting to rise again. I did not mean anything by it. I do not even know you. His expression did not change, but something in the air shifted, like I had said the one thing that actually mattered. That is the problem, he said, straightening slightly. And for the first time I felt it fully, not just fear, but the weight of being seen by someone who understood more than I did. You said something in that message, he continued, his voice lowering just enough to make me lean in without realizing it. Something you were not supposed to hear. My stomach dropped, my mind racing back through every word I had said, every sound in the background, every detail I had ignored because I thought it was just my life, just noise. I do not know what you are talking about, I whispered, but even to my own ears, it sounded uncertain. He held my gaze for a long second, then reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, tapping once before turning the screen toward me. My own voice filled the car again, softer this time, trembling, but underneath it, barely noticeable until now. Another sound, a name, a location, something that made his eyes sharpen as he looked back at me. You are in this now, he said, calm, final, like a door closing somewhere I could not see. And I realized with a slow, sinking clarity that leaving had never really been an option, not from the moment I pressed send. I stared at the screen, my own voice echoing back at me. But now it sounded different, not just tired or scared, but exposed, like something inside it did not belong to me anymore. I heard it clearly this time. The faint background noise I had ignored. A man speaking somewhere behind me earlier that night. A name I had not even noticed. A place I had passed without thinking. It felt small then, meaningless. But the way Adrian was looking at me told me it was anything but. I did not hear that. Before, I said, my voice barely steady, trying to hold on to something normal, something safe. He did not respond right away. Just watched me like he was measuring whether I was lying or simply unaware, and somehow that felt worse, because I was not lying. I just did not understand how something so small could suddenly matter this much. You were not supposed to, he said finally, his tone low, controlled. But someone else will. My chest tightened. I do not know those people. I do not even know what that means, I said quickly, shaking my head, trying to push the situation back into something I could explain, something that did not feel like it was slipping out of my control. But he stepped back slightly from the car, creating just enough distance to make the moment feel colder, more final. That is exactly why this is a problem, he replied, and for the first time, there was a subtle edge in his voice, not anger, but certainty, like he had already decided something I was just now beginning to realize. I followed his movement with my eyes, my fingers curling tighter against the seat. So what happens now? I asked, and I hated how small that question sounded, how much it revealed that I was already looking to him for answers. He glanced toward the street, toward the SUV still idling like it had not moved in hours, then back at me. Now you stop thinking this is your life, he said, and the words landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. I blinked, confused, defensive. This is my life, I insisted, even though it sounded weaker the moment it left my mouth. He tilted his head slightly, like he was acknowledging the effort, but not the truth. It was, he corrected quietly, then reached for the edge of the car door, holding it open wider, an unspoken invitation that felt nothing like a choice. My heart started to pound again, louder this time. I am not getting out of my car, I said, trying to anchor myself to something familiar, something that belonged to me. But even as I said it, I knew it sounded fragile, like a rule that only worked if everyone agreed to follow it. He did not argue, did not raise his voice, did not force anything. He just looked at me, steady and patient, the kind of patience that did not run out. Claire, he said, My name softer this time. Almost careful, and somehow that made it harder to resist, not easier. If you stay here, you are alone with something you do not understand, he continued. If you come with me, you are at least inside it. I swallowed, my mind racing, trying to find a third option, a way to step sideways out of whatever this was, but there was nothing, just the quiet street, the dim glow of streetlights, and the man standing in front of me who already seemed to know how this would end. You are asking me to trust you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He held my gaze without hesitation. No, he replied. I am telling you that you do not have a safer option. The honesty of it hit harder than anything else, because it was not comforting. It was not kind. It was simply true, and something inside me shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of it. The realization that this was no longer about a mistake I could fix. It was about a path I had already stepped onto. Whether I wanted to or not, I looked down at my hands, still resting on the steering wheel, then back at him, and slowly, without fully understanding why, I let go. The moment my hand left the steering wheel, everything felt different, like I had just crossed a line that did not exist a minute ago. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped out into the cold night air, the chill biting through my sweater, grounding me for half a second before the weight of his presence pulled me back. Adrian did not move to touch me, did not rush me. He simply stepped aside, giving me just enough space to walk toward the SUV on my own, and somehow that made it worse. Because it felt like I was choosing this, even when I knew I was not. The pavement felt louder under my shoes, each step echoing in my head. I could feel his gaze on me the entire time, not heavy, not suffocating, just constant, like he was making sure I did not disappear. When I reached the SUV, the back door opened before I could hesitate. I glanced inside, leather seats, dark interior, everything clean, controlled, untouched by anything messy or human. I hesitated for half a second, just enough to wonder what would happen if I turned around and ran. But I already knew the answer, not because he would chase me, but because I would not get far, not from whatever this was. I slid into the seat, the door closing softly behind me, sealing the space with a quiet finality that made my chest tighten. Adrian walked around the car and got in beside me, not across, not distant, but close enough that I could feel the shift in air when he settled. The driver pulled away without a word, the street outside fading into motion, my car left behind like it had never mattered. I kept my hands in my lap, fingers laced together so tightly they started to ache, staring straight ahead, because looking at him felt like giving something up I was not ready to lose. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just heavy, like it was waiting for something. Finally I broke it. Where are we going? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He did not look at me right away, his gaze fixed forward, calm, unreadable, somewhere. You can be seen, he said, and I frowned slightly, confused. That does not make sense, I replied, turning just enough to catch his profile, sharp lines, composed expression, nothing wasted. He glanced at me then, just briefly, but it was enough to hold me still. It will, he said, and that was it. No explanation, no reassurance, just a statement that expected time to do the rest. I exhaled slowly, trying to piece together what he meant, my mind still stuck on the message, on the sound I had missed, on the way everything had shifted because of something I did not even know I had said. You think someone heard that too? I asked quietly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He did not answer immediately, and that silence was answer enough. My stomach tightened. I was just talking, I said, more to myself than to him. I was just trying to get through the night. He turned his head slightly, studying me again, not with judgment, but with something more complicated, something I could not name. And now the night is paying attention, he replied, and a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the weather. I leaned back into the seat, the leather cool against my skin, watching the city lights blur past the window, everything familiar suddenly distant, like I was already leaving it behind. You keep saying I am in this, I said after a moment, my voice softer now, less defensive, more uncertain. But you still have not told me what this is. The car slowed slightly as we turned onto a quieter street, the lights dimmer, the buildings taller, the world narrowing without me noticing when it happened. Adrian finally looked at me fully, his expression calm, but his eyes sharper now, more focused. It is something people do not walk away from once they are noticed, he said, and my breath caught, not because of fear alone, but because of the way he said noticed, like it was something bigger than being seen, something closer to being chosen. I swallowed, my voice barely steady, and I was noticed because of a message I was not supposed to send. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, slow, deliberate. No, he corrected quietly. You were noticed because you spoke without knowing who was listening. And that felt worse somehow, because it meant this was not just a mistake. It was something about me, something I had done without realizing, something that had reached further than I ever intended. The car came to a smooth stop in front of a building that looked too quiet for the middle of the city. No bright signs, no noise, just glass and shadows reflecting back at us. I stared at it, then back at him, my heart starting to race again. What is this place? I asked, and for the first time since this began, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not softer, not warmer, just more certain. Somewhere you start understanding, he said, and before I could respond, the door beside me unlocked with a soft click. I did not open the door right away. I just stared at the handle as if it might disappear if I waited long enough. The quiet outside pressing against the glass like a warning. Adrian did not rush me, did not say a word. He simply waited beside me, calm, certain, like he already knew I would step out. And that certainty made my chest tighten more than anything else. I reached for the handle slowly and pushed it open. The night air colder here, sharper somehow, the city noise distant like it had been turned down. I stepped out and looked up at the building, tall, clean lines of glass and steel, no sign, no name, just reflection and silence. It felt less like a place people worked and more like a place things happened that were not meant to be seen. Adrian walked ahead of me this time. Not far, just enough to lead without forcing. The doors opened before we reached them, smooth, automatic, like we were expected. Inside was even quieter. Polished floors, soft lighting, everything minimal and precise. No clutter, no warmth, just control. My footsteps echoed softly as I followed him, my reflection catching in the glass walls, looking smaller than I felt, or maybe exactly as small as I was starting to feel. We reached an elevator without passing a single person, and that somehow made it worse, like the building itself was watching instead. The doors slid open, and we stepped inside. Adrian pressed a button without looking, and the elevator began to move, smooth and fast, my ears popping slightly as we went higher. I folded my arms without thinking, trying to hold on to something steady. You keep bringing me places without explaining anything, I said, my voice quieter now, less sharp, more tired. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the numbers climbing above the door. Explanation does not change reality, he replied, and I exhaled slowly, frustration mixing with something I could not quite name. Maybe fear, maybe something else. It might help me understand it, I said. He considered that for a second, then nodded once, not dismissing me, just choosing his words carefully. You said a name in your message, he said. Not directly, but it was there, in the background. My stomach tightened again. I did not even notice it, I admitted. He looked at me then, more directly this time. That is why it matters, he said, and the elevator slowed, the motion easing until it stopped with a soft chime. The doors opened to a floor that looked even more controlled. Then the lobby, dim lighting, wide open space, glass walls looking out over the city like we were above everything else. I stepped out slowly, my breath catching for a moment at the height, the lights below stretching out in every direction. It should have felt beautiful, but instead it felt isolating, like we were too far removed from anything normal. Adrian walked toward a long table near the windows, his movements calm, measured. He did not look back to see if I followed. He did not need to. I did anyway, stopping a few feet away, keeping just enough distance to remind myself I still had a choice, even if it felt like I did not. He placed his phone on the table and turned it toward me, the screen already playing that same recording, my voice filling the space again. But this time he paused it at a specific moment, rewinding just enough for me to hear it clearly. The name again, sharper now, impossible to ignore. My chest tightened as I listened, realizing how obvious it sounded. When you knew to listen for it, who is that? I asked quietly. He did not answer immediately, just watched me process it. Watch the moment it shifted from confusion to understanding that this was bigger than I had thought. Someone who does not tolerate being mentioned, he said. Finally, calm, but there was something underneath it now, something heavier. I swallowed, my eyes dropping back to the screen, to my own voice frozen there. And now they know I said it. I whispered. He shook his head once, slow, deliberate. Not yet, he corrected, and my gaze snapped back to his. But they will, he added, and the certainty in his voice made the room feel smaller, like the walls had moved in without me noticing. I took a step back without meaning to, my heart racing again. So what am I supposed to do? I asked, and for the first time since this started, there was a pause in him, not hesitation, but something like consideration, like the answer mattered more than anything else he had said so far. He stepped closer, not invading, just closing the distance enough that I could not pretend this was distant anymore. You stay where I can see you, he said quietly, and the words settled into the silence around us, not as a threat, not as a command, but as something else. Entirely, something that felt like both protection and possession at the same time. And that was the moment I realized this was no longer just about the message. It was about where I stood now and who I stood in front of. His words did not feel like a request. They settled into the air like something already decided. And for a second, I just stood there, staring at him, trying to understand how protection and control could sound exactly the same. That is not an option, I said quietly, but my voice did not carry the strength I wanted. It felt thinner here, like the height and the silence were stripping it down to what was real. Adrian did not react immediately. He just watched me, measuring something again. Always measuring. And that made me straighten a little, holding on to what little ground I still felt under my feet. I have a job. I have a life. I cannot just stay here because you say so, I added, forcing the words out more firmly this time. He turned slightly, glancing out at the city below before looking back at me. You keep saying that like it still belongs to you. He replied, calm, not dismissive, just factual. And that stung more than if he had argued, because part of me already knew what he meant. I crossed my arms, more for comfort than defiance. You do not get to decide that, I said. He took a step closer, not aggressive, just enough to close the distance again, and I felt it instantly, that quiet pressure of his presence that made everything else fade. I do not decide it, he said, his voice lower now, more focused. The moment decides it, and you already stepped into it. I shook my head, frustration rising. All I did was send a message. I insisted, and for the first time, something almost like a flicker of impatience crossed his expression, subtle but there. No, he corrected, sharper now. You spoke where you were not supposed to, and now the wrong people can follow that sound back to you. The room felt colder after that, like the glass walls had let something in. I looked down at the phone still resting on the table, my own voice frozen on the screen, and for the first time, I felt it clearly, not just fear, but consequence. Real and unavoidable. So what? I just disappear? I asked, my voice quieter now, the fight draining into something heavier, more uncertain. He studied me for a long second, then shook his head slightly. No, he said, softer this time, and that shift caught me off guard. You stay visible, just not to them. I frowned, confusion tightening in my chest. That does not make any sense, I said. He exhaled slowly, like he was choosing how much to give me, how much I could handle. If you vanish, they look harder, he explained. If you remain in sight, under control, they assume you are not alone. I blinked, the logic settling in slowly. Uncomfortable, but undeniable. Under your control, I said, and there was no accusation in it this time. Just recognition. He held my gaze without flinching. Under my protection, he corrected, and something about the way he said it made my chest tighten again. Not fear exactly, something more complicated. I looked away first, my eyes drifting back to the city lights, trying to steady my breathing. You do not even know me, I said after a moment, softer now, almost to myself. You do not know if I am worth this. There was a pause behind me, then the sound of his steps. Slow, measured, stopping just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him without turning. I do not do this because you are worth it, he said quietly, and for a second my heart sank, until he continued. I do it because you are already involved. I turned then, meeting his eyes again, searching for something in them, some sign that this was temporary, that this would pass. But all I found was certainty, steady and unshaken. And how long does that last? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then glanced toward the phone, toward the paused message that had started all of this. Until the moment no longer matters, he said. And something about that answer made it clear. That moment had already changed more than I could see. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, the room suddenly feeling too large, too exposed. And if I say no? I asked, one last attempt to find an edge, a boundary. He looked back at me, calm as ever, but there was something final in his expression now, something that did not leave space for illusion. Then you are alone with something that is already moving toward you, he said, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything else, because deep down, I knew I had already made my choice the second I stepped out of that car. I just had not said it out loud yet. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just stood there with his words settling around me like something I could not push away. And the worst part was not that he was forcing me. It was that he was right. I could feel it in the way my chest stayed tight, in the way my thoughts kept circling back to that message, that name, that moment I did not even remember noticing. If I stay, I said slowly, my voice quieter now, less defensive, more careful. What does that actually mean? Adrian did not answer immediately. He walked past me toward the window, his reflection cutting through the glass alongside the city lights. And for the first time, he looked almost still, not distant, just contained, like everything about him existed within clear lines he never crossed. It means your routine changes, he said, turning slightly so I could hear him without needing to move closer. You go where I say, you avoid what I tell you to avoid, and you do not speak about anything that brought you here. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. So I just follow instructions, I said, and there was a trace of something in my tone, something like resistance trying not to disappear completely. He looked at me again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, not softer, but more direct, like he was choosing to meet me where I stood instead of just observing. You stay alive, he corrected, and the simplicity of it cut through everything else. I looked down, my hands tightening slightly against my arms, and for the first time since this started, I stopped trying to argue with the situation and just felt it, the weight of it, the shift, the fact that whatever this was had already taken something from me, even if I could not name it yet. And when it is over, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now, I just go back to normal. He was quiet for a second, and that silence answered more than anything else. I looked up at him again, searching his face. That is not how this works, is it? I said softly. He did not lie. He did not soften it. He just held my gaze and said nothing. And somehow that was worse, because it meant I was right. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just a little, not in surrender, but in understanding. You said I need to stay visible, I continued, trying to hold on to something practical, something I could manage. So I still go to work, still go home. He nodded once. Yes, but not alone. I frowned slightly. You mean someone follows me? I asked. He tilted his head just slightly. Someone makes sure you are not unprotected, he replied, and I could not help it. A small shake of my head. That sounds exactly like being followed, I said, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something close. Enough to feel real. Perspective matters, he said quietly, and that almost made me laugh. Almost, if the situation had been anything else. I walked a few steps away, my eyes drifting across the room again, taking in the clean lines, the silence, the way everything felt controlled down to the smallest detail. And I realized something then, something that settled into me slower but deeper than everything else. He was not improvising this. This was not new to him. This was a system, a world he understood completely, and I was just inside it now. I turned back to him, my expression steadier than before, not because I felt safe, but because I had stopped expecting to feel that. And you, I said, meeting his eyes again, where do you fit in all of this? He did not hesitate this time, not even for a second. I am the reason no one touches what is under my watch, he said, calm, certain, like it was not a threat but a fact that had already been proven, and something in my chest shifted again, not fear this time, not exactly, something closer to awareness, to the realization that standing here, in front of him, was not just dangerous, It was also the only place I was. Not alone anymore. I held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded, slow, deliberate, not agreeing to everything. Not yet, but acknowledging the reality I could no longer ignore. And that was the moment everything inside me went quiet. Not because the fear was gone, but because I had finally stopped trying to run from something that was already standing right in front of me. I did not realize how quiet I had become until the sound of my own breathing felt too loud in the room. Like everything else had stepped back to give space to what I had just accepted. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough to stop resisting it. Adrian watched me for a moment longer, then reached for his phone, the same one that had pulled me into this, his fingers moving with practiced ease before he set it down again. "Your phone," he said, and I blinked, confused for a second before I reached into my pocket and handed it to him without thinking. The action felt strange, automatic, like something I would normally never do. He turned it on, scrolling briefly, then placed it back in my hand. "You will not delete anything," he said. "Not messages, not calls, not recordings." I frowned slightly, instinct pushing back. Why would I keep something that got me into this? I asked. He held my gaze steadily. "Because removing it creates attention," he replied. "Keeping it makes it look like nothing changed." I looked down at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass, realizing how even the smallest action now had consequences I could not predict. I nodded slowly, not because I liked it, but because it made sense in a way I could not argue with. "And if they contact me?" I asked quietly. He did not hesitate. "You do not respond," he said, simple, direct. "You let me see it first." I let out a breath, my grip tightening slightly around the phone. "So everything goes through you," I said, and there was no accusation in it this time. Just clarity. He nodded once. "Until it no longer needs to," he replied, and I noticed that he did not say if, just until, like it was already decided that this would pass. Eventually, somehow, I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight of it feeling different now, heavier, like it carried more than just my life. "You are very calm about all of this," I said after a moment, watching him carefully, trying to understand how someone could stand in the middle of something this complicated and not seem affected. He tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "I do not confuse uncertainty with danger," he said, and that answer stayed with me longer than I expected, because I was doing exactly that, letting what I did not understand become something bigger than it might be. I turned away again, walking a few steps toward the window, the city stretching out below, endless and distant, and for the first time, I felt how far I was from the version of myself that had sat in that car just an hour ago. Everything had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change the direction without me noticing when it happened. "You said someone might come looking," I said, my voice softer now, more grounded. "What does that look like?" Adrian moved to stand beside me, not too close, just enough that I was aware of him without feeling crowded. "It looks like questions that seem harmless," he said. "Conversations that feel casual. People who appear where they should not be." I listened carefully, the details settling into place, not comforting, but clarifying. "And I just act normal," I said, more to confirm than to ask. He nodded. "You act exactly like you did before," he replied, then added, "except now you know who might be listening." That sent a quiet chill through me, not sharp like before, but steady, something I could carry instead of something that overwhelmed me. I took a slow breath, letting it out carefully, then turned to face him again. "And you," I said, studying him more closely now. "You will always know where I am." He did not look away, did not soften it. "Yes," he said simply, and something about the honesty of that settled deeper than anything else, because there was no pretending, no illusion, just truth, clear and unfiltered. I nodded once, slow, thoughtful, not agreeing to everything, but accepting the part that mattered, the part that kept me standing here instead of running back to a life that no longer fit the same way. "Then I guess I am not invisible anymore," I said, quietly, and for the first time, something in his expression shifted, not warmth, not quite, but recognition, like he understood exactly what I meant. "No," he replied, his voice low, steady. "You are just being seen by the right person." And that was the moment I realized something had changed in a way I could not undo, because it was not just that I had been pulled into his world. It was that a part of me had already stopped wanting to leave it the same way I had come in. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. Every light below felt like it belonged to someone else. Every street like it held conversations I would never hear the same way again. I stood there for a long moment, letting that settle, not fighting it, not trying to return to what I had been an hour ago, because I knew I could not. Adrian had not moved. He was still beside me, still watching, not closely, not intensely, just enough to remind me that I was not standing here alone anymore. And somehow that mattered more than I expected. So this is it, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. I go back to my life, but it is not really mine anymore. He did not correct me this time, did not soften it. He simply said, you go back to it differently. And that felt closer to the truth, even if it did not make it easier to accept. I nodded slowly, my eyes drifting back to the glass, to the reflection staring back at me. I looked the same tired eyes, same worn jacket, same everything. But there was something else now, something underneath it that had not been there before, awareness, maybe, or the beginning of something I could not name yet. When do I leave? I asked, turning slightly toward him. He checked the time on his watch, a small, precise movement that somehow felt deliberate. In a few minutes, he said. You return home, you sleep, and tomorrow you follow your routine exactly. I let out a breath, slow and steady, grounding myself in something simple, something I could hold on to. And you will know where I am. I added, not asking anymore, just stating it. He met my gaze without hesitation. Yes, he said, and there was no discomfort in it, no apology, just truth. I nodded once, accepting it fully now, not because I liked it, but because I understood why it was necessary. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, less heavy, more settled, like we had reached something unspoken but clear. I turned back toward the window one last time, memorizing the view, the height, the distance, because I had a feeling this was the last moment things would feel even remotely simple. You said, I spoke. Without knowing who was listening, I said quietly, what happens when I know? He did not answer right away, and for a second I thought he might not answer at all. But then he stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the shift in air again, that quiet presence that had followed me since the moment he stepped out of that car. Then you choose your words carefully, he said, his voice low, steady, because now they matter. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting that sink in, then opened them again, steadier this time, clearer. And if I make another mistake? I asked, and this time there was no hesitation in me, no panic, just a need to understand the line I was walking. He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was deciding how much truth to give me, how much I could carry. You will not, he said finally, and there was something in his tone that made it feel less like confidence and more like expectation, like he had already decided that I would learn fast enough to survive this. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. You sound very sure of that, I said. He held my gaze for a second longer, then said quietly, because now you know what silence costs. And that stayed with me, deeper than anything else he had said, not as fear, but as something sharper, something that would follow me long after I left this place. The elevator doors opened behind us with a soft chime. Breaking the moment, I glanced back, then at him, and for a second, I hesitated, not because I wanted to stay, but because I understood that stepping into that elevator meant stepping back into a life that would never feel the same again. He did not move to guide me this time, did not gesture, did not speak. He simply watched, giving me the space to take that step on my own, and that made it real in a way nothing else had. I turned fully, walking toward the elevator, my steps quieter now, more certain, as if something inside me had aligned without asking permission. I stepped inside, then paused, looking back at him one last time, and in that moment, I understood something I had not been ready to admit before. This was not over, not even close. This was just the beginning of something I had already been pulled into, something that would follow me beyond this building, beyond this night, beyond the version of myself I had been before all of this started. The doors began to close, and just before they did, I heard his voice one last time, calm, quiet, but impossible to ignore. Claire. I looked up, meeting his eyes through the narrowing gap, and he said, do not forget, The night you sent that message was the night everything started listening, and then the doors closed, and I was alone again, but not the same kind of alone I had been before.